Hi, my name is Ashley Gardner from Pace Health Management. This clip is a short clip on manual handling and ergonomics, and it's to support the material in your manual. We're just going to give you a brief overview of the key principles in this short introduction, and then we'll go through some actual tasks and talk practically about how to go about those tasks. So the first thing we've talked about in terms of the principles of manual handling is stance. Okay, the key point here is to have a wide base of support. So by a wide base of support, what we mean is we want our centre of gravity going in between our legs. So if we've got a task where we're square on, have them wide apart, or alternatively having them wide apart forwards and backwards. That way your centre of gravity is through the middle of your body, and it allows you to use your legs as well as your back to lift. Okay, so the second thing we'll talk about is posture. By posture, what we're looking to do is to maintain the natural curves of our spine. So things to look for and things to think about here is just not getting rounded through the shoulders. Okay, quite often when we're lifting we tend to round through the shoulders and lower back. We always want to keep that in a straight line. How we do that is by moving from our hips and particularly our glutes. The lower we can get our hips to the ground while still keeping our heels in contact with the ground, the more power we can get from our glutes, and therefore the less stress on our lower back and our shoulders and our neck. The third thing we're going to look at is leverage. This is an area where I find a lot of people go wrong with manual handling, particularly at the end of the lift. So what we want to do here is keep the load nice and close to your body, particularly as you're moving into a target and putting it down. Okay, so if you're lifting a bag of cement onto a ute tray, making sure you keep the load close right into the letting go of the load rather than stopping and reaching forward. Okay, the next thing we look at is torque. The key thing with torque is making sure your hips stay square to the target when you're doing a lifting or you're pulling or pushing activity. So trying to turn your nose and toes towards the target. So if you're lifting something, just say you're digging, making sure that your nose and toes are turning towards the target. If you're picking something up, making sure that everything is turning and those hips stay square. Similarly, if you're holding something and it's pulling you, trying to keep your hips square to that target. And the final thing is pacing, just maintaining a smooth and coordinated pace. So manual handling relates to many tasks. It relates to pushing, pulling, lifting, carrying. It also relates to sustained postures. So it applies to office workers. It applies to sitting at a desk for a long period of time. It applies to when you've got to kneel down and pick something up. It applies to reaching forward and leaning over a counter or reaching to put something up. So manual handling is all these tasks, and that's what we're going to cover today in the next couple of clips. In the next task we're going to look at a digging task, putting the soil into the wheelbarrow and offloading it. The key things to remember, the key points to remember are looking at torque. Okay, so when you're digging, pushing through with your legs and bringing your nose and toes towards the target. Okay, so that it's always square on. The barrow is beside me. I'll be looking at pushing through and turning and dumping into the wheelbarrow there. Okay, so nose and toes at the target. The other thing I'm looking at doing is getting the hips down low and pushing through as I lift the load. Okay, rather than bending my back and getting all the lifting coming from the lower back. I'm using the legs to push through. Obviously, where possible, you want to do rotation that way when you're digging, and ideally rotation the opposite way just to balance it out so that you're not using the same muscles for the whole day. So next we come to lifting the load and offloading it. The key thing here again is keeping those hips square, getting down nice and low, okay, so you can push through your legs. So you're pushing up through your legs. When you're coming around the corner, trying to keep that load square. So you're bringing that leg back around and keeping the load nice and square. Turning and then pushing through and dumping the load. So the key things are keeping those hips square, keeping your hips low to push the load rather than using your back. Okay, we're going to talk about a couple of tasks here. I've got the blower in my hand, but this might apply to weed spraying and also whippersnippering. If you've got a blower, a whippersnipper, or whatever you're using as a strap attached, use a strap obviously. Other things that you can do to assist is alternating your hands. Obviously it's quite hard on your wrists and your shoulders and your neck to hold it for a period of time, particularly with that vibration. Okay, so there's some things that you can think about. In terms of the manual handling, I want you to think about leverage. So keeping the blower or whatever you're using as close to your body as possible. So you don't want it out here. You know, as soon as you go a little bit out from your body, you increase that load on your spine and your neck and your shoulders a great deal. So keep it as close to your body. We're talking about before with the digging task, keeping your nose and toes facing the target. Okay, so instead of rotating, okay, we're moving those toes at the target just to reduce that load on the spine. In this next clip, we're going to look at lifting. This might be a bag of cement or some fertiliser, anything that you've got to lift off the ground. Okay, what we've got here is a bench height that's probably not optimal. Okay, ideally we'd like it to be at waist height, but we all know the workplace isn't optimal. So we've got to maintain the principles. They still apply. We've just got to adjust them for this situation. So you'll see what I do with this lift to adjust for that changing height. So what I'm going to do, I'm thinking about getting the stance nice and wide, and the glutes work first, or your hips move first. So I'm going to take that backside back and bring the chest forwards, keeping the heels on the ground. What that does is give me a steady base of support and allows me to use my legs to lift rather than the lower back. While I'm lifting, you'll see my back stays straight. I'll bring it into my chest, okay? So going through that again, if I was putting it down, I'd put it down in the same way. So legs wide apart, hips down, bring it into your chest, walking forwards, and to get it down to the lower height, I simply take a step so I can keep the load nice and close and lower the knees down. Okay, so the load stays close to my body rather than just dumping it there and all the load being taken up by my back. So pick it up, I get down low, turn the nose and toes, coming back over, stance is wide, glutes lead or hips lead, pop it back down again. The next task we'll look at is carrying a bucket. Now we're going to talk about a different type of lift, a carry. Okay, with a carry, the main thing to think about is keeping your body nice and level. So you're not leaning that way or not leaning this way. Quite often when people pick up the loads, they'll either pick it up a far distance from their body. Okay, so we want to get nice and close. And remember, keeping our body square, bring it close to the body, and when we're walking, not leaning over to the side, so you're walking and then popping it down in front of your hips, okay, not to the side. The next task we're going to be looking at with manual handling, it's not only lifting and carrying, it's also sustained postures. Quite often it's being in the one position for a long period of time, which puts you at most risk of injury and pain and dysfunction. So we're going to look at kneeling tasks, so this would involve anything from troweling, okay, to pulling out weeds. The key thing with kneeling tasks is to try to keep that spine nice and straight, so you're not rounding through the back, okay, and your pulling task, you're bringing it in and you're alternating sides. Another option for kneeling would be to have one leg forwards. Again, you want to keep those hips nice and square, okay, and keep the load in line with your hips, so alternating different knees.